Hi Brent, good to see you.
Hi Andy, good to see you.
What was the topic at last week's Thoughtful Discussion Group?
Last week we were looking into whether or not duplicating something that somebody else had done was plagiarism or was it flattery.
And where did the discussion go?
Well, initially we sort of got talking about the terms, and then before too long it became obvious that it was difficult to determine whether it was flattery or not from an objective point of view, and even from plagiarism or not from an objective point of view. So we concluded that it was a subjective evaluation, and that since there were two people involved, the person who had been making the copy and the person who had been copied, we said, well, maybe if you got permission to make a copy, then it couldn't be plagiarism. Mm-hmm. And that kind of went to, well, what if that person had died? You couldn't possibly get permission in that circumstance. So we started talking about it some more, and we kind of came up with the idea that both the recipient of the duplicative effort and the creator, the original creator, could have their own independent views of whether a certain duplication was flattery or plagiarism. And it turns out that when you really start thinking about it and start knocking the idea around, that what really matters is the person who created it. That person really decides whether or not it's flattery or it's plagiarism, or in some cases even just insulting. Mm-hmm. The person who we went to an extreme example of someone who decided to get plastic surgery so they looked exactly like someone else whom they admired. Mm-hmm. And we imagined the circumstance where this individual who had done this meant it as an homage, like because they felt the other person was so wonderful. And of course the other person might be very thrilled with that. They might think it was kind of creepy. Mm-hmm. If their doppelganger now went out and murdered someone, they might decide that though it had been flattering originally, later it wasn't so flattering. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting to kind of look at how the different points of view worked, and to realize that it didn't really matter necessarily the intention of the person who was doing the work.
So it was the reception of that flattery, right?
Yeah, and that was sort of what was king. The reception of that flattery really decided whether it was flattery or whether it was plagiarism. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, so I was going to ask if this was if someone was duplicating or imitating a great writer's style. Did you get into that, or great painters?
Yeah, we did, and we learned that, and we came to learn amongst ourselves that there are lots of reasons for duplicating someone else's work, and sometimes it's just education. It's got nothing to do with flattery. It's got nothing to do with plagiarism. You're trying to learn to paint like Van Gogh so you can master the techniques that Van Gogh had. So that was kind of interesting discussion too, that the question isn't as two-sided as it seems. There's a third side and a fourth side and a fifth side. Mm-hmm. When you start looking at it, sometimes you just find something in their work that you really like and you want to have it for yourself, and you're willing to go make it for yourself. It doesn't have anything to do with flattery of that other person. You're not trying to gain anything by doing it. You just would like to be able to go through the process of making it yourself. One of our members is a potter, mm-hmm. and she likes to learn from other people's techniques and replicate what they've done to make sure that she understands properly how it's done. Then she may, as part of a sale, sell that pottery. Though it wasn't her intent to sell it, if it's up to good enough quality and mm-hmm. she thinks somebody would buy it, she might sell it. So it was interesting to see how the different dynamics can play out, and it's not as clear as one issue or the other.
The TV industry is really pretty much built on stealing other people's ideas. They say imitation is the sincerest form of television. So there's some.
Tied in there, we got into that. We said imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but flattery is by its nature insincere. Mm-hmm. If you look at the definition of flattery is insincere. So we actually went and looked up this quotation. It came from Colton, who is a gentleman who's probably around 1812 20 or so. And when you think about the first dictionary coming out in 1802 from Daniel Webster, so the concept of these words being defined and having a fixed meaning was still very new. And so perhaps he didn't mean flattery when he said that sentence the way it's defined today.
Right. So let me just make sure I understand that flattery, the intention of flattery is never good. Is that?
Well, by definition, it's insincere, it's pandering. We went to Oxford English Dictionary, which defines, there's an expert on just flattery. And that person decided there are lots of FL words in the English language that mean like to flutter or flip or to tap repeatedly. And so flattery has that kind of idea, like tapping repeatedly, but it's also got flat in it. So maybe it was like stroking with the palm of your hand, that kind of just sort of trying to stroke somebody's ego.
As you were describing that, I could see that as the kind of behavior you would see in some kind of hierarchy, a corporate hierarchy, maybe an artistic one.
Yeah, so we did get some rather colorful analogies for that. So flattery is not all that nice. If you're, we started out the discussion thinking that if somebody's trying to flatter you, well, that's kind of nice. And then we got halfway through the discussion, found out exactly what flattery meant, and decided, well, it wasn't so nice. But maybe after we talked about it that way, in that sense for a little while, maybe we said, well, what if they meant it as an homage?
Right, and I wonder, you can then tread that gray area between compliment and flattery, but I think some people, once they're complimented, may think that it's crossed over into flattery and their guard goes up.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's kind of that point where you're like, why are they doing this? Are they expecting something in return? And you don't know, like in the real world, you wouldn't know. In our pretend world, we could make up to talk about. We could say, oh no, they definitely expected something in return, and how does that change the circumstance? Or they definitely didn't. So how does that change the dynamic?
Thanks for filling me in on that discussion, and I look forward to hearing about more.
Come on out to the open air at Roosevelt Center, where we'll have the thoughtful discussion group Under the Stars. Roosevelt Center from 7 to 9 on Tuesdays.
On Tuesdays, through the summer, correct?
Through the summers.
We'll see you there. Thank you.
All right, sounds good.